Progressives everywhere are celebrating the Supreme Court's landmark decisions today on marriage equality. But yesterday's big ruling, the one that all but killed the very heart of the Voting Rights Act, has cast a shadow on the triumph of this day. And it is already heralding in what promises to be a long, difficult, bruising struggle for equal access to the polls. Literally within hours of the Supreme Court's decision to strike down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act yesterday, the state of Texas moved to capitalize on what officials there apparently see as a political victory. Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott announcing the state would be immediately implementing a voter ID law that was blocked last year under the now defunct authority of the Voting Rights Act. Quote, with today's decision, the state's voter ID law will take effect immediately. And while he was at it, he also made a push to revive the redistricting maps Texas Republicans tried to implement back in 2011, but which a federal judicial panel said last year violated the Voting Rights Act. Quote, redistricting maps passed by the legislature may also take effect without approval from the federal government. Some Texas Republicans, in other words, seem awfully excited that they no longer have to prove that their voting laws are not discriminatory before implementing them. And they are not alone. 5 other states also appear poised to move ahead with voter ID laws now the Supreme Court has relieved them from federal scrutiny. If you think there's any kind of geographic theme here, you are not mistaken. Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Virginia have already passed voter ID laws that no longer need pre-approval. And South Carolina signaled its intent to move forward with a voter ID law that had previously been blocked under the Voting Rights Act. Joining me now is Congressman Joaquin Castro, a Democrat from Texas. And Congressman, I gotta say, as a Democrat in Texas, a Latino Democrat in Texas, I feel like yesterday's decision has a very, very special relevance to your political future.
Well, certainly, Chris, many of us were very disappointed yesterday in Texas and throughout the country with the decision of the Supreme Court. I live in a state where, as recently as 2 years ago, a federal court found that the Texas legislature, the Republican Texas legislature, intentionally discriminated against minorities in drawing congressional districts and other districts. And so this voting rights decision certainly doesn't help in a state like Texas.
I would even go a little further than doesn't help, and I'd like to hear your reaction to this. I mean, let's look at the stark facts of the state of Texas. It is growing in population. That population growth is coming disproportionately from Hispanics, and it is very clearly going to be the case in the near future that there will be a Hispanic majority in that state. If you are a white Republican in the state of Texas, you have every political incentive to limit the voting power of that growing majority.
Oh, that's exactly right, and that's what we've seen over the last few legislative sessions. As you mentioned, right away, Greg Abbott said that the voter ID law that was passed in 2011 would take effect immediately, but they've also regulated things on polling places, on mail balloting, all sorts of regulations that are aimed at essentially shaving off Democratic voters. And I'll give you one quick example.
Please.
In that voter ID law, they allow for the use of military ID, but they don't allow for the use of student ID, clearly, obviously favoring voters that tend to be a little bit more conservative over those that tend to be more Democratic.
Congressman, you're a member of Congress as well, and the Supreme Court, of course, has kicked this across the street into your and your colleagues' laps. Have you had conversations with your colleagues about attacking this problem immediately?
Quite honestly, it's a tough conversation because I think for a lot of Republicans who, especially in the states that you mentioned, the 9 states, oftentimes where the Republican primary is controlled by Tea Party folks, it's going to be tough for some of them to essentially come to an agreement where they are admitting, hey, the Justice Department should be reviewing what my state does with respect to elections. So now that the Supreme Court has made this decision, the job of Congress is to try to come to an agreement and still have some oversight, with respect to elections and voting. But it's going to be a tough haul.
Do you see any nexus between the immigration bill that is now moving its way through the Senate? It looks like we may get a vote on it tomorrow. And the voting rights decision yesterday, in terms of the way that the coalition politics in America are playing out? Because it seems to me like Texas is really the ground zero for this future political battle for the country. And obviously immigration reform is going to have a lot to do with what the demographics of the voting population of your state looks like in the near future.
Oh, sure. I think all of these issues will affect elections. Texas, for example, is a state that by 2020 will be about 45 or 46% Latino. In the 10 years after that, will be over 50% Latino. Same thing for California. So immigration reform and how the Congress handles adjusting the Voting Rights Act are going to be crucial in the coming years.
Finally, we just had Wendy Davis on, and I think you tweeted some support last night. What does her moment last night, and again, I should be very clear, that bill was not passed in that session. The governor's called another one, so that fight is going to start again next week.
Right.
But what did that moment mean for Texas Democrats who have been on the map for so long in that state?
Yeah. Chris, that literally was the moment that Texas Democrats came alive. I spent 10 years in the legislature waiting for a night like that, and I never got it. We never got it when I was there. And so it was electrifying last night. I stayed up here in Washington till 2:30, 3 in the morning, following all the coverage, sending out tweets, and there was so much energy you could tell. We're just all very proud of Wendy, glad that she and the other state senators and legislators stood up for what they believe.
Congressman Joaquin Castro, thank you very much.
Thank you.